The Powkiddy Y6 is an interesting experiment to say the least. What would happen if you took an inexpensive retro handheld and put it into the form factor of an Amazon Fire Stick? Outside of a somewhat chunky form factor, it does succeed in looking like a streaming stick. It's powered by single USB and comes with an HDMI extension cable in case the bulky design interferes with your HDMI slots. And there's one free USB port at the end that lets you plug in the wireless controllers. And once you plug everything in and install 2 AAA batteries into each controller, you are ready to go. The UI is pretty heavily themed, but it does look okay, and all the games are split up by different systems. Hopping directly into a game I was sure was going to work fine, F-Zero Maximum Velocity for the Game Boy Advance. And as we can see here, the performance is actually pretty good. No noticeable frame skipping, as well as the quality of the emulation is pretty good. What you might not notice until you move over into a different handheld like the Game Boy Color is that the aspect ratio is wrong. So moving over into Mega Man Extreme on GBC, and we can see that the game is very, very stretched. And unfortunately, there aren't any options available to change pretty much anything about the emulation. The same is going to be true of pretty much every single handheld or console that we're going to play. Neo-Geo Pocket Color works pretty well, but it is pretty severely stretched. Same thing with Sega GameGear. One thing I did notice though while playing this game is that there is a little bit of input lag. I'm not sure if this is due to the controllers or the console or just my display, but there is some slight hesitancy while playing. And unfortunately, at least in my testing, you can't just swap in a different controller to get a better experience. The only system in my testing that doesn't stretch the games is actually Nintendo DS. By default, it opens up games in a side-by-side orientation, but you can go vertical, as well as swap the top and bottom screens if you needed to, or look at one screen individually. Although for games like Metroid Prime Hunters, these games are pretty much going to be unplayable since you can't use the touchscreen to aim while you're actually playing. N64 emulation in performance is rather decent. I did notice some visual artifacts and bugs while playing the games, but other than it being stretched, there wasn't really anything to prevent you from playing these games. The story kind of continues with PlayStation 1, which hopefully would work well since the controllers are shaped like PlayStation controllers. And in terms of performance, it actually does. Though again, everything's stretched.
Let's begin.
Moving over into arcade games, and these also play stretched, but also play pretty well, with the select button being used to insert more coins. Super Nintendo games, more specifically the ones that use the Super FX chip, also run very well. Again, still stretched, but no real visual artifacts or anything noticeable to report here. Though, again, with platforming and things that require a little bit more precision of the controller, I did find them a little bit harder to play with the screen delay. The default console when you turn on the Y6 3D game stick is the PSP, and so it feels fair to judge it based off of PSP performance, and it actually does better than I was expecting. The performance is decent, not necessarily that great, though probably still playable for most people. I did encounter several visual artifacts while playing the game though, so that might be a deal breaker if you're looking at this to play PSP games. Visually, Dreamcast looks pretty good, other than the screen stretching, though performance was not perfect in my experience. It did manage to hold on to a 60 FPS most of the time, but there were some dips that would also cause hitches in the audio and such, but I would probably say, B+ for Dreamcast. Naomi games, though, run a little bit worse. Probably somewhere in like the 40 FPS range on a 60 FPS game, so 33% slower than it should be. Not to say that is a deal breaker for all games, especially some of the 2D games might run okay, but if you're looking at Naomi performance or 3D arcade performance, you're probably going to want to look elsewhere. So what's the verdict? The Powkiddy Y6 is actually a fairly competent gaming device, but the software that it's included with is not that great. It's missing a lot of features that people would expect and has some performance issues that could probably be ironed out with better software, but also just getting more features, getting correct aspect ratios, as well as other niceties like getting more than one save state per game. And on systems like Dreamcast, save states are going to be a necessity since, for some reason, the emulator is set up to not have any storage space for the save games. And to round everything out, the names of the games in the UI are wrong. I mean, I guess technically they're correct, but many systems, the first letter of the game is chopped off. So you have games like Men, or 14 Tomcat, or just all these games that are just missing the first letter. And it's not even like it's every single system who has that. Some of them have it and some of them don't. And it's not just certain brands of systems who have that. It's just random. But yeah, it just kind of sets the whole tone for what you should expect for the system. The hardware is not bad. And even with the rather cheap controllers, it's not a bad experience while playing most games. But the software and everything missing from it or broken in it, it's probably not something I'd recommend for most people.